Welcome everyone to the Patient Engagement Open Forum. We're delighted to have several hundred registered participants for this session entitled From Patient Engagement Metrics Framework to Actionable Tool, What's After Paradigm. Next slide, please. My name is Haley Chapman, and I'm a program manager with Patient Focused Medicines Development, PFMD, that together with UPATI and EPF have organized this open forum. Next slide, please. This session is one of several open forum virtual events, and perhaps some of you are joining us from our first session earlier today, that we've offered through 2021 that's focused on moving towards stronger patient engagement. This means taking a holistic perspective to consider the landscape and all of the stakeholders and actors that can contribute to and play a role in patient engagement. And while our panelists will provide unique perspectives, valuable learnings, and insights, as attendees, you also play an integral role. With your participation and contributions to the session, we can foster collaboration and co-creation to break down the silos and fragmentation that have often been present in patient engagement work. Next slide, please. Over 20 years ago, as a master's student and as a consultant, I developed a rudimentary tool to evaluate the importance of and effectiveness of partnerships between pharmaceutical and patient organizations. The intent of the research was to better understand how the patient perspective was being acknowledged by pharmaceutical companies. And by evaluating these partnerships, could we help to progress and improve future initiatives? But it's important to remember that this was at a time 20 years ago when relationships between pharma companies and patient organizations were not very popular or even considered. But have we come a long way since then? Now, not only are patients increasingly engaged with industry and other stakeholders, there are many more opportunities and tools available to measure, monitor, and evaluate this type of engagement. So one of those is the Patient Engagement Monitoring and Evaluation Framework. This was developed by the Paradigm Consortium to help partnerships between patients and/or patient organizations, biopharmaceutical companies, regulators, and health technology assessment bodies to self-evaluate the progress and impacts of patient engagement. And it's through monitoring and evaluating patient engagement with the use of a tool like this that we were able to progress and move forward with more meaningful and stronger patient engagement. I'm excited to work together with all of you to identify how we can best support the use of this paradigm tool by anyone who will plan, develop, and assess patient engagement initiatives. The results that we collect today will help to inform the PFMD project that together with other stakeholders, we will co-create, shape, and improve the use of the paradigm framework. Next slide, please. I'm also looking forward to hearing from our expert panel about the importance, the use, and the timing of patient engagement measurement and evaluation tools from the perspectives of very many different stakeholders. I'd like to ask each of our speakers to take a minute to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about why measurement and evaluation of patient engagement is important to you and your organization. So Paula, if we can start with you, please.
Thank you, Haley. So my name is Paula Ray. I'm a senior manager in the part of the National Institute of Health Research's infrastructure, the Applied Research Collaboration for Oxford and Thames Valley. I've worked in patient engagement for over 10 years and in the last sort of 3 to 4 years really focused on impact. And so the reason it's important to me is to improve the patient engagement practice, particularly to make it more inclusive and to be able to capture the broad range of activities and impacts that our involvement creates. Thank you.
Terrific. Thanks, Paula. It's great to have you with us today. And Lida Vai?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. So my name is Lida Vai, and I'm a researcher and lecturer at the Athena Institute here at the VU University in Amsterdam. And I was also involved in the Paradigm project. And why is it important to me to monitor and evaluate? For me, it's a tool for learning. And by learning together as an individual, as an organization, and at a system level, I think we can enhance the meaningfulness and sustainability of patient engagement.
Terrific. Thank you. And certainly last but not least, Anna?
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you this afternoon. Thank you for the invitation. My name is Ana Diaz. I am project officer at Alzheimer Europe. I'm based in Luxembourg. And as lead by, I was also part of the Paradigm project. And we were there trying to bring the views of people living with dementia in the different activities of the project. And in relation to why it's important, I'm not going to share that now because it's part of my speech later on. So I hope you stay with us for a little longer and then you can learn why, from my perspective, it's important.
Terrific. Thanks, Anna. You've given us a little teaser to make sure we hang on to the end there. That's great. And so next slide, please. And so our time together looks like this. Following this introduction, we'll hear from Paula, who'll provide an overview of monitoring and evaluation of patient engagement, and also, as she mentioned, consider some of the wider societal impacts. Lida Vai will then help take a deeper dive into the paradigm framework and introduce the experience of Alzheimer Europe. To complement this example, then we'll hear from Anna, who will share a bit more about the patient organization perspective. We'll have time for questions to the panelists before it's your turn as attendees to provide your insights as we review a series of questions to help inform the next steps in the refinement of the paradigm tool. So before we get started and dive right in, if I can have the next slide, please. I hope it goes without saying, but we ask that you are fully present and engaged with our session. It's through your questions, feedback, and insights that will contribute a great deal to this discussion. And given the large number of participants with us today, all the microphones are muted, but we encourage you to ask your questions in the Zoom Q&A function. We are recording the session and it will be available through the Global Patient Engagement and Network Synapse within a couple of days. You will receive email notification when it is up and ready. Next slide, please. And so just finally, a few more logistical items before we start. As mentioned previously, we encourage you to share your questions in the Q&A function as illustrated on this slide. And if you do have a question, let's try to see if somebody else has asked a similar question. So try to upvote or like a question so we can avoid the repetition. Just in terms of our time, we want to be able to make sure we get through as many questions as possible. So we'll do our best, and I encourage our panelists to respond in the Q&A as well as appropriate. But please feel free as well to use the chat function to provide any additional commentary or insight or exchange dialogue with the attendees as well. A friendly reminder that your name will be associated with a question, and of course, to please be respectful of others in your comments as you would in a live meeting. Next slide, please. So as mentioned previously, this session is also a workshop to collect ideas and insights from all of you. We will be using Slido to facilitate the polls and the discussions during the workshop. We suggest that you might like to use your mobile phone, but it also will work well with a computer as well. In a couple of slides, you'll see a code that you can scan with the camera of your phone, or you can also go to slido.com and enter the code hashtag PEOF 2021, and we'll also provide this in the chat. So I think it's time now to find out who we have with us today. So if we can go to the next slide, thank you. So we'll be asking a question that you can complete in Slido once we've had a chance to review the question with you. To tell us about yourself, what type of stakeholder group do you represent? From the patient perspective, patient advocate, patient organization, are you an individual patient or caregiver? Are you from the pharmaceutical or biotech industry, the devices or medtech industry? Are you from academia or a researcher, from consulting or through an agency? How about policymaker? Or do we have anybody out there from regulatory or from an HTA body as well? We are hoping that some healthcare professionals are out there. And if we haven't quite captured the stakeholder group that you represent, please feel free to comment in the Zoom chat with the other comments as well too. So if we can slide over now to Slido, and as we start to see responses coming in, as people log on, terrific. We'll just give people a few chances, a few more seconds to respond as we go through. Obviously, a large representation from industry. Give it a few more seconds. And maybe another 15 or so seconds. I see we've got about 70 people responding, but we also have about 140 or so participants in our session today. So just giving everybody a chance to see. This will really help us as we gear some of the questions and for the panelists to understand who's in the audience so that we can, as I said, gear some of our questions and direct some of the dialogue that way as well too. Obviously a large contingency there from the patient population, from the representatives, the advocates or patient organizations. That's wonderful to see, obviously. And maybe we can just scroll down a little bit, just curious to see if there's anybody from regulatory or, yeah, so a couple of people perhaps from regulatory or HTA. Great. I think we'll move on to the next slide now. So welcome everybody. It's wonderful to see you here. And so for question 2, think about from your organization or for those of you who are attending as a patient or as a representative there for an organization that you do collaborate with, what's the current status of measurement and evaluation of patient engagement in your organization? It does not exist. So that's something that you haven't talked about or haven't thought through at all. Perhaps there are varying degrees of support for measurement and evaluation. And in terms of degrees of support, that could be willingness. It could be in terms of leadership support. It may also mean as it relates to resources as well too. The third answer, the organization feels it's important, but there's been no action yet. The fourth one being there's a solid measurement and evaluation strategy in place. And the last one being we are collecting meaningful data and reporting results. So if we can move over to the next slide and let's see how respondents. I think this will be quite interesting to see in terms of how our attendees are actually integrating in terms of measurement and evaluation into their organizations. Perhaps there are varying degrees of support. That is encouraging. That's great to see. We'd obviously love to see the last response. We are collecting meaningful data and reporting results higher, but I think that's a good sign for this session then. There's a lot of learning to do and to be able to provide some feedback and some tools for you as well. Great. Okay, so we have varying degrees of support for measurement and evaluation. A little lower than that, the organization feels it's important, but no action yet. So again, hoping that by the end of this session, you will feel that there are tools that do exist and that action can be taken and we can move forward with the measurement and monitoring and evaluation. Terrific. Let's move on to the third one, the last question. How familiar are you with the paradigm monitoring and evaluation framework? So an interesting question. We hope perhaps that you had an opportunity perhaps to go through some of the links that were associated with this session or some previous work and engagement that you may be familiar with paradigm. But as we go through looking at the responses here, number 1, not at all. Is this the very first time you've ever heard of the paradigm monitoring and evaluation framework and you're just looking to see what it's all about? For number 2, B, perhaps you've attended previous sessions or webinars to learn a little bit about it, maybe done a little bit of looking online, so you have a general or a high level understanding. Number C, 3, I'm considering ways to implement it. The fourth one, I'm currently using the framework. Or we'd love to hear from people out there who have used the framework and they're actively collecting data as well. So we can move to the next slide. And let's see how the responses come in. Great. So we've got a few more responses coming in. We'll just leave it another 20 seconds or so. Fabulous. All right. I think I can just talk to these and perhaps a few more people will provide their input. So most people have a general high-level understanding. And so perhaps, as I mentioned before, have attended another session previously, but I think that hopefully by the end of this session, you'll have a better understanding of it and really looking to ways that you will be able to take it back to your organization and really start considering and acting on it and using it. There are those people out there that perhaps this is the very first time you've ever heard anything about this, and that's okay as well too. I know between Paula and Lee Devai's presentations that they're going to give you some more details and some more information so that you will walk away feeling more informed and start thinking through ways that you will be able to use the tool. Obviously, a few people there thinking about ways to implement it, and a few more just suggesting that they're currently using the framework, and fewer than that, obviously, having used the framework and collecting the data. Great. I think we'll leave it with the response there. There's a couple more coming in, but I don't think that it's changing it that much. So thank you, everybody, for providing your input. That's really helpful for me and for the panelists to be able to see who's in the audience with us today. And that will certainly help to highlight and illuminate for us as we go through the presentations, as we have some of the Q&A discussion as well too. So as we get started, we can move on to the next slide there. Thank you. As we begin our presentations, as I mentioned, we will have time for questions and answers at the end of the 3 presentations. So please, I encourage you all to use the Q&A function to submit your questions, and we will address as many as we can. As I mentioned before, this really is a session to encourage all of you to provide your questions, provide your feedback, and let's engage with the panelists and have a strong discussion around this so that we are really able to develop this framework and provide some actionable tools from it as well too. So if we begin with our first presentation, I'm delighted to welcome our first presenter. I'll turn this over to Paula.
Thank you, Hayley. And yeah, I've just been asked to give an overview of impact and want to try and sort of open it up so that people think about all the different considerations when we're looking at impact, from which perspectives and what we are looking to capture. So next slide, please. There are so many different definitions of impact, and it's important that you work with your stakeholders to define what impact actually means for you and for all of your partners. This is the National Institute of Health Research's definition. We developed it in relationship to patient engagement, public involvement. And what was really important when we were developing this was to understand that our public contributors' activities weren't the only thing we were measuring the impact of. What was really critical was it was about working in partnership, that our researchers, our organisations and our public partners together were what made the impacts happen, and the impacts were different for each of those. So next slide, please. There are some key points to consider when regarding impact. It can be positive and negative. What we don't want to do is just have a bias towards the good news stories. We can learn so much when things don't go right, and that's what we need to make sure we have feedback cycles that will integrate that into our systems. Time is absolutely critical here. It takes a long time for impact to occur. We need to develop processes that will enable us to track change over time, and we need to be aware of where those might be. Oftentimes, they're beyond the realms of our work, but there are systems we can use to capture longer term impacts. Clarity over the different units of analysis is also important. Whether we're looking at the impact on individuals, on our research groups, the organisation as a whole, our programmes, portfolios, strategic initiatives or policies, that really makes a difference when we're looking at how we monitor and evaluate that. And finally, due to the complexity of the health and care ecosystem, it is really unlikely that we'll be able to definitely attribute change or impact directly to one activity or one individual. But we need to be able to articulate in evidence how we are contributing towards that overall impact. Many people equate impact with change, which the majority of the time it's about a change, be it positive or negative. This could be from the research that we've supported leading to something increasing, decreasing, speeding up, stopping, continuing. Some change can be anticipated while others are less expected. And I'm going to give some examples because our real world is messy and it's not always how we expect it to be. Much of this change will be incremental, arising from big bodies of work or activities, but occasionally change can be really pivotal, and I think we've seen that evidence very clearly over the last year. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, I meant to say, but the one thing is, sometimes the patient engagement activities validate what we're doing. So there isn't necessarily a tangible change, but that is still having an impact. I hear so many times when people say, well, we didn't really make a difference because they already had it mapped out properly. That's fine, you're validating it. So that is also an impact. So just wanted to make that note. Apologies. Next slide, please. Apologies for this slide. It is a very busy slide and I do not expect you to be able to read it. But I just wanted to show this as it's a piece of work carried out by King's Policy Unit in the UK, where they reviewed the UK's research excellence framework returns for 2014. And what they did was they extracted all the different types of fields of research, which is shown here on the left, and mapped across all the different impact topics that people were reporting against. And the reason I wanted to show this was because it shows that there's so many interlinkages between and across research fields and disciplines, and the impacts, and it's not linear, you'll do this project, you will get this impact. And so I want you to sort of take that as your sort of inspiration, what we're trying to achieve here, to give you the freedom to look at the potential impacts and not feel restricted by that. The links and all the slides from this will be shared, and the links take you to the full review, which has a lot more information if you're interested. Next slide, please. So impact's often depicted as a quite linear process, where in reality it isn't. There's often interdependencies and feedback loops. But it is helpful to view it as a linear process to help people understand the different elements across that process. So whether that's from your inputs, so the staff, the experience that you bring to it, be that lived or learnt experience, the funding, the resources that you need to start an initiative or run an organisation, through to the activities and the processes. That's the, convening in a community advisory panel, being part of a clinical trial, doing the data analysis, right the way through to our outputs and things like publications, recruiting to time and target on a trial, the patient voice truly having a voice in being heard, to shape all of our projects, to develop a new device or a new intervention, a medication that's going to really benefit people. But oftentimes we then move on to our next project, our next initiative, and don't tend to take time to stop to think about the wider societal impacts of what we're doing. Ultimately, we want to all go and improve health outcomes for patients. That's why we're all here. But can we be reducing health inequalities, improving health literacy through the work that we do? For example, if you're doing a health education intervention, the patients and the public that are involved in shaping that they'll learn and they will gain experience and knowledge from the process. They will be able to share that with their families, with their wider communities. You can actually spread the word much more effectively through these informal networks. And so just wanted to sort of share that it's important to look across the whole process. And hopefully those of you that are familiar with the paradigm monitoring and evaluation framework, that you can see there is alignment here with the different stages and elements within that, and I will come back to that. Next slide, please. One thing I wanted to sort of raise as well is the sort of two strands of impacts that we're looking at here. One is the impact the patient engagement activities and organisations have on the research that we conduct, from how we initiate it through to how it's put into practice. But the other element is how much impact the research then has on the wider society. And there are so many domains that we can consider here. And I'd like to acknowledge my colleague Sarah Thomas for a lot of the work that she's done in National Institute of Health Research around impact, where all these domains have come from, and a later slide that I'll be using. We need to sort of consider what are we ultimately trying to achieve? Do we want to change policies, behaviours? Do we want economic stability? Develop new techniques, areas of research, improve health and well-being, as I say, is something I think goes without saying. But how do we monitor that? How do we track that we're actually achieving that? For an individual, it's about gaining skills, confidence, or knowledge in a good example. But conversely, they could feel dismissed or objectified where things haven't gone well. And as I say, when we're looking to improve patient engagement, we need to learn from this, and we need to be able to take on board these learnings. And if we don't follow up with people, we won't ever know what the real situation is. So one example I wanted to share was that a medical device company was working and was embedding patient engagement in all of their processes. And part of it was to bring patients into the production line at the factory to be able to show them exactly what goes into creating the device. That was in part to upskill and empower the patients to be able to contribute to the development process, but also to show them that they were asking for this information. But what was really unanticipated in the impacts was that because the people working on that production line saw firsthand the patients that these components they were putting together were going to change the lives of, it was really motivating, and the company observed a substantial improvement in the quality. Things weren't getting sent back because they weren't meeting the standards. Everything was coming through. And I thought it was just a lovely example to show that that wasn't what the intended role of that bringing the patients in was for, but it had that consequence. Another similar one is a big charity was, again, as we all are, embedding patient engagement across their processes. But looking at their data, they noticed there was a direct correlation with as the patient were becoming more visible in different departments, there was a higher staff satisfaction, and their staff retention rates went up, and there was a direct correlation, which again I think is, from an organisational point of view, really important to capture and to feed back to our patients that they are impacting so much more. Next slide, please. So we can learn an awful lot from other sectors. We often value most what we can measure easiest, so numbers, and I think for patient engagement particularly, so much when we're talking about impact are the more tacit things, the softer things. And the two areas I think are really key that big businesses already monitor and evaluate are trust. How do we develop it? And it takes an awful lot of time, so we should value the inputs that are required in that and the impact that has on us. The other element is networks. Again, we need to use our networks, build the networks, but make sure that they are genuine dialogues, not one-way flow of information. And they're essential to create, to measure impact, but much harder to do. But as I say, big business already map these and have tools we can use. Next slide, please. So in National Institute of Health Research, a couple of years ago, we were asked to look at the impact of the public involvement activities across the whole of NIHR. And we adopted the International School of Research Impact Assessment's 10-stage process that you can see outlined here. it's fundamental that throughout this process, all stakeholders are involved throughout. So you need to understand the first point of it, badged as context, but we sort of loosely translated that, is to look at what does success look like and to whom. So for our patient contributors, it was, being heard and really shaping the research, lessons learned, improving outcomes. For some staff members, it was actually being able to deliver the job that they were being paid to do. So from different perspectives, you get different things, and different stakeholders value different things. Often we capture things that we feel are important, but actually from a patient perspective, that wasn't the most important thing you've realised in that project. And the sort of next bit is the purpose, is the why, and I'm going to come on to that in more detail. And the rest of this all feeds very nicely into the paradigm framework, because it helps you unpack the different stages you need to go through, and I'll go through a bit more in detail in the next slide. Next slide, please. So the why, it is this diagram, and this concept is completely underpinned by the ISRIA, the International School on Research Assessment principles, and you're unlikely to be actually looking to evidence all of these areas, and it's important in your discussions right at the beginning to really understand why are we measuring and capturing the impact. And I think historically for patient engagement, it was very much about securing resources, allocation, and also to continue the investment in patient activities. So I think it's really important to know that at times it changes, but I feel we've moved more into a space where we're looking at analysis, where we're understanding what works and what doesn't work in the context of patient engagement. But for me, the two most important things for measuring impact in patient engagement and research is to be accountable, particularly for the NIHR. We're a public funded organisation. We need to show that we were using that responsibly and transparently, and that patients and the public have a voice in how that money is spent. But also, and where I think we're at this point, is adjustment. So being able to continually improve what we're doing, to increase the activities and improve them in a systematic way. Next slide, please. So what does your impact assessment toolkit look like? So this basically, I think, summarises hopefully where we've come on this journey. So logic models, essentially they are a mechanism to represent very easily those 5 inputs that I said. So the inputs, activities, outputs, outcomes, and impacts, to have that discussion with your stakeholders, to know that you're all aiming for the right thing and you are truly capturing the full spectrum of the potential impacts of your work. That then is feeding in very nicely into the monitoring and evaluation framework. So that gives you that overview, that helps you understand the indicators and the metrics that you will use through each of those stages. Do we know we're putting the right things in? Do we know that we're going the right way along the process and we're getting the outcomes we expect? In the work we did with NIHR looking at this, we looked at all the public involvement engagement data that had been collected, and there was a lot of it, routinely collected data, and categorised it against these impacts, inputs, activities, outputs, outcomes, and impacts. And actually, out of all of that data, only 2% was actually reporting on impacts. And so we came to the conclusion that we were asking the wrong questions. While that data was important, the number of participants recruited to studies, the number of public contributors involved in shaping those studies, that's all important, but we were missing the fundamental, so what? What changed? What's the difference that's made? And so we need to adapt our reporting mechanisms to include a mixture of qualitative and quantitative methods. And I've just put in a few here of the different, all the different resources that you can access to collect this sort of data. But what I'm really keen and what I really like is the fact we bring those data sets together to create those case studies, and that we can share the learning, we can inspire others, and things like the Patient-Focused Medicines Development's Book of Good Practice does exactly that. It shows you what others have done, the impacts they had from that, and you can sort of go, oh, we can adopt that, or it'd be good to learn more about it. And finally, it's really important that we communicate what we find to feed back to our contributors. So many times when I've spoken to public contributors and researchers sort of independently about what changed and how it was for them and the impacts on them or the work, they tell very different stories, and it's so lovely to bring those together to share that, because they don't realize how much each other's got out of the relationship and the partnership. They only sort of see a fraction of it. So we need to be very careful and creative in how we share that and communicate that. So I'm really sorry, it's been an absolute whistle-stop tour overview of impacts. Happy to answer any questions, but want to hand over to Leadavai, who's going to bring our focus much more into the role of the monitoring and evaluation framework. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula, for this excellent overview. I think that was really helpful. And so I'm Leadavai Vat, and together with Ana Diaz from Alzheimer Europe, I will guide you to the Paradigm Monitoring and Evaluation Framework. And I was asked to reflect on what we have achieved so far and discuss with you possible next steps. So next slide, please. So let's start with looking back. In 2018, when the Paradigm project started, we conducted a gap analysis and we asked stakeholders, like, what do you need? What are important things to work on? And they strongly agreed that there's a need for metrics and for guidance on how to assess the progress and impacts of patient engagement. So we thought about, okay, let's first look at the literature. What's out there? What do we already know? And we found that there's very little consensus on what to measure and how to measure that. And that are mostly single metrics that are used. So basically assessing one of the little things, the little effects that Paula just mentioned, but not capturing the full perspective. So we agreed that there's a need for a broader set of metrics to capture the value for everyone involved. So next slide, please. So for those who are not familiar with the Paradigm project, it was a multi-stakeholder initiative with pharmaceutical companies, European patient organizations, and academic institutions. And within this project, we created the so-called Patient Engagement Monitoring and Evaluation Framework. We did this in 3 steps. So first, we drafted a very preliminary version of a framework based on literature and interviews and co-creation sessions. Then we really applied that in practice. So we worked with 24 real-world initiatives, and they applied the framework, and we adapted the framework based on their experience. And then last step, we had a consensus meeting where we agreed on what are the key things to measure and what metrics should be included in the framework. So next slide, please. So where are we now in 2021? Well, I'm happy to share with you that the Patient Engagement Monitoring and Evaluation Framework is available for everyone, free to use at the Paradigm Toolbox website. And with that, we also created some additional resources. So there's an introductory video, there is another video with some case examples, there's a video with a prototype of an online tool, and there are a lot of supplementary files. For example, we have mapped metrics with possible methods and measurement tools. There are other guidance documents available, not all online yet, but they will soon become available online. So I've seen that some of you, about 30%, is not very familiar with the framework. So for those, I will give a very brief overview of the framework. I have to keep it short, but if you have any questions, then please share them with us in the chat. And then I will go to how you can use the framework and any questions that I've received so far about using the framework. So why a framework, and what is basically a framework? In short, it is a tool. It's a tool to help you to evaluate the progress and impacts of patient engagement. And as Paula has shared with us, sometimes it can take a while before those impacts become visible. So that's maybe difficult then to track those impacts. So a framework basically provides you a map to help you understand How do you get from where you are now to your impacts and to assess and track progress over time? Next slide, please. So what is the content of the framework? This slide shows you a visualization of the framework, and I will very briefly walk you over those different components. So it consists of 6 different so-called evaluation components, things that you could consider to measure, that come with 87 possible metrics. Now that sounds quite a lot, but don't worry, you don't have to measure them all, because this tool allows you to select those metrics that are most important for your collaboration. We have grouped those metrics to make it a bit more easy to navigate it into so-called 17 subcomponents. I will now focus on the key evaluation components. So first of all, objectives. Objectives is about what you hope to achieve with patient engagement, so your intended impacts basically, and also your purpose for monitoring evaluation. Why would you like to monitor and what would you like to do with that information? The second one, input, consists of metrics that talk about the check whether you have the conditions in place for meaningful and sustainable patient engagement. The next one, activities and process, is about the implementation of patient engagement. So it can help you to track the progress of implementation, but also to identify any areas for improvement. Next, learnings and changes in blue here in the visual is about the direct short-term results directly come from patient engagement. So those can often be measured after activities and can give you some indication towards impacts. Lastly, in green here, there's a whole list of possible impacts. And we have separated them in impacts for research and medicine development and for stakeholders, such as empowerment, reputation and trust, and embedding of patient engagement. In gray, we have emphasized that patient engagement takes place in a landscape, in a context. And sometimes there are factors in that landscape that influence your success, and those may be out of your control. So when you look at the impacts of patient engagement, it's important to also consider those factors that influence success. So to summarize, this is a tool that you can use to select metrics in order to develop your own tailored framework. So you don't need to measure all the 87 metrics. On average, the patient engagement initiatives we worked with selected about 20 to 25 metrics across all the components of the framework. Next slide, please. One of the questions I've often received is when to best measure what. And for that, I try to create this table to bit of clarify when you can use the framework and what component can be measured when. Basically, can use the framework for all the different phases of patient engagement. So in the planning phase, it can be in particular important to gather information about the objectives of patient engagement from different stakeholders, because that can create a shared purpose. And you could also look at the inputs and context to identify any areas for concerns to increase your chances of success. When implementing patient engagement, it can be very helpful to track progress over time. So you can look at those metrics that relate to process and activities, but also learnings and changes and the context. And then you can identify areas for improvement to increase, again, your chances for success. When it comes to reporting and evaluation, often it takes a while before impacts become visible. So it can be after a project ended or a mature collaboration, but it are those impacts that provide insights into the value for stakeholders, and it can help you to make decisions about future activities. So basically, the framework can be used at different phases of planning, implementing, and evaluating patient engagement. Next slide, please. So this can be a quite impressive slide. I just want to let you know that the framework is currently available in Excel format, and we have created a little video to explain how you can use the Excel. So the Excel consists of a description of the different components of the framework with all the metrics. Those metrics come with a description and also some metrics that go well together that you can measure in sets. And some examples of methods. So I will not explain it in detail in this presentation, but should you have any questions about using the Excel, then please don't hesitate to reach out. And we aim to develop a more user-friendly online version. But key is, in the next slide, is to customize it, to tailor it to your own needs. And therefore we suggest 4 steps. The first step is to determine your own objectives for patient engagement and the purpose for monitoring and evaluation, as we talked about. Then to develop that so-called roadmap to success and select the appropriate metrics. And then select the methods and create a feedback loop to also use the information gathered. Again, this is further explained in also in the publication, and should you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. So next slide, please. Another question that I've often received, which is a quite difficult one, is what to evaluate. And there are different levels of evaluation, units of analysis, as Paolo also talked about. In Paradigm, we focused mainly on initiatives and activities, for example, a patient advisory board or community advisory board. And also we worked with one-off events as also multiple events. But you could also look at, for example, objectives of patient engagement, which can be per phase of research or can be per stakeholder. And in the Paradigm project, we created 4 sets of metrics for different objectives of patient engagement. Lastly, you could also look at an organizational or system level, which could focus on, for example, embedding or cultural change. So that can help you if you are leading the change in your organization to track progress over time. We found that it's quite difficult to directly implement a full strategy organization-wide. Often the data infrastructures are not in place. So we suggest to start small. First start with a pilot evaluation, focus on something, then reflect on the feasibility and the quality of data, use of information, and then build from that a better strategy. Next slide, please. Another question that I've often received is how to select those metrics out of the 87. Well, there are 2 options to make it simple. One is the a la carte option. So think about a restaurant. This includes all the 87 metrics, which we group per component. So your appetizer, main course, and dessert. And you can select your own set of metrics from that. So it's basically a tailor your own kind of option. Then the other option is, I call it a so-called chef's choice menu option this time, but it's basically, you could use the sample sets of metrics that were created in the Paradigm project. So those are metrics that were pre-selected already by multi-stakeholders, which you can use as a starting point, and you can then customize where needed. Lastly, we have created a resource, criteria for metric selection, as a guidance document with 9 possible criteria, with also advantages and disadvantages for each criterion. So to help you understand how to select metrics. Most importantly, regardless of what option you choose, is to be clear on who selected the metrics and for what reason. Next slide, please. So we'll spend the last couple of minutes before I hand it over to Anna on a patient perspective on monitoring evaluation. So within the Paradigm project, we worked with a number of patient organizations and patient groups, and we asked them, what do they hope to get in return for their engagement? And in this slide, you can see a picture from a group, people with dementia and their caregivers. And they created with us a so-called tree of impact. And we asked them to share what impacts they are expecting, but also to prioritize what they find most important as a group, which you can find on the left here. So making a difference to the lives of people with dementia, learning, enhanced well-being, and a sense of belonging and respect. And also they hope that by their engagement, it can reduce the stigma around dementia. So next slide, please. So what we did then is from those impacts that we collected, we created a set of metrics. And this is just an example. I know it's a busy slide. You don't need to read it all, but it's just an example of how we created that set of metrics. So it's in green, you can see the impacts there, which we translated into metrics. We formulated them neutral, as they can be positive or negative, and can be measured quantitative and qualitative. And then we worked our way backwards to select metrics that can help us to track progress over time. So this is an example of a set of metrics. And most of these metrics relate to the patient perspective, and most of these impacts can be found, for example, under the impact component empowerment. And we have seen that those metrics are often not selected by other partners involved. So that's why it's important to also engage also the patient perspective. So with that, I think I come to the last slides. There are some key messages here, but the most important thing is that we have a tool that you can use, the tool that you can help to self-evaluate your progress and impacts. And that can help to build patient engagement stronger. For that, you need to engage all the partners. And there are different ways of doing that. And I hope that Anna can share her perspective on that. My last slide is about the next steps, but I think we will have time to discuss that. If you can look ahead, then there are also a lot of things that we can still do, of course, to improve the tool, make it the digital version. We could think about more guidance or a help desk. We could think about data systems. So we have collected a lot of feedback on what is still needed. But I think the first step is to start using the tool and to share lessons learned. And I would like to thank you for your time. Looking forward to your questions, and hand it over to Ana Diaz from Alzheimer Europe to also share her perspective on monitoring evaluation, and also from a patient organization community, why is measuring important. Thank you.
Thank you, Lidavai, for your introduction. As Lidavai was explaining, I work for Alzheimer Europe. This is one of the 5 patient organizations who were involved in the Paradigm project. But just to give you a bit of context, Alzheimer Europe had been carrying out public involvement activities before Paradigm for a number of years now. We set up a group of a working group of people living with dementia, is the one Lidavai had on one of the last slides. And this is a group of 14, 15 people who are living with dementia themselves, with different type of dementia, and who come from different countries across Europe. And they've been involved in public involvement activities, in medical, but also psychosocial research for a number of years. And so you can see this is a bit broader than what Paradigm was, which was more focused in particular in research on medicine development. So our focus is slightly broader. And when I was preparing for this short speech, one of the things we were talking is that often when we talk about monitoring and evaluating, it might be assumed that this is a very important topic, or very sexy topic for academics, perhaps for companies, for researchers, but often then people might think, well, this is not a topic where patient organizations or patients themselves might be so interested. So my reflections today are a bit of based on my own experience in Paradigm and in working with Lidavai and her team, what were some of the things I found particularly interesting from a patient perspective. This is not a comprehensive set of why this is important, just a few of them, and I hope this will also trigger further discussions. I'm pretty sure other patient organizations or the patients in the room today might have other ideas of why that interesting to them. Just thinking which ones were mine. And the first one is back to why we do patient engagement, why for us as a patient organizations we want to involve patients in that way. And I think for all of us, we want things to change. We want things to be better for patients. That might be, we want patient participants of a particular research study, we want them to have a better experience, or we might want to have better medicines or better interventions. We might want to have things changing for our communities, researchers being more aware of that we need research to be more inclusive of different patients. So we might want different things, and this is because we want to make a difference. So basically, I think one of the important things in monitoring evaluation is that from a patient perspective, we don't want to tick a box. We don't want patients to be sitting just because it looks good, because perhaps it's good to have a couple of patients. We want to make sure they are making a difference in the things, in the research that is being carried out, to be more meaningful for the patients and to have better outcomes. So this is a very good way to help us to see how we are making a difference in the short and in the long term. My second important kind of thinking when we are working in Paradigm was that very often when we talk to people involved in public involvement activities, they say it was really nice. On the time of the preparation, we had a lot of emails. It was we have a lot of efforts trying to make sure it was inclusive, that was accessible, a lot of information. We really enjoyed the day. It was fantastic. We never hear back anything from what happened. And unfortunately, this is still something that happens to many patients. So somehow we also feel that opportunity to talk about monitoring and evaluation is a way to provide feedback and to build between the patient community and the researchers, the different stakeholders, a relationship of mutual respect, where patients are there to provide input, to share their views and what they think is important, but also researchers have this kind of commitment to bring back in the first hand how their input has been used, so what has happened. Sometimes we might have made change, sometimes it didn't change anything, but in the long term, we are changing perspective and ways of thinking. So, and also what happened with the research itself? Was it positive? Did it do what we wanted to happen? So it's a way to provide this feedback and mutual and relationship of mutual respect. The third one I wanted to share with you is also part of that day that Lidavai was showing in her slide. And I think when Lidavai and her team, they came to our meeting in Brussels with our group, she was asking, so the people in our group, what's the value for you? What's in it for you when you are in a public involvement activity? What is something valuable? So we start talking about why they hope and their expectations. This is a conversation we have never had in the past with our community. Why is that important to you? What brings to your day-to-day? And as I think as Lidavai was expressing, there was empowerment, there was learning, there was a lot of things. And I think somehow this was very interesting to see how talking and opening these discussions about monitoring and evaluation can help us to learn about our community and also to understand better how the researchers think and what value from our work. So it's a way also of learning and understanding and getting to know better each other. And the last one, and perhaps this is very specific to dementia, but I think it was very important to understand about the context. And in the one hand, there was when discussing about monitoring and evaluation, there was two important discussions. One was about, we talk about patient engagement in Europe as if we had an image of everywhere being the same, and it's not true. We still have a lot of inequalities in different countries where sometimes patient engagement is happening and in other countries where it's not happening. So it's still a lot of things to do from the patient perspective. We need to push that to happen. But also in the context, we also thought in the case of dementia, there's a lot of misconceptions and stigma around dementia, which are kind of not helping for people with dementia to be involved in this kind of activity. So we need to actually continue working in that direction. So these discussions also really helped us to continue thinking about all these inequalities and all these important topics like misconceptions and stigma that we have to continue working in order to make patient engagement a reality across Europe. So this was my kind of four main topics that I found really interesting, particularly with just opening and start thinking around these lines. I mean, you might think it's overwhelming thinking on a framework, but just opening these discussions can bring a lot of important new ideas and thinking. And just to summarize, I think just connecting back to Lidavai and Paula, this is something that requires a lot of plan, a lot of effort, but I think the more important message is that something we need to do together. So this is not something that patients or companies or researchers have to do on their own, but this is something where we really need to sit around the table as we do for planning and for conducting the patient engagement. And we have to carry on beyond the day of the patient engagement activity in that kind of joint conversation and continue doing that work. So that was my message today. I hope this kind of sparks more discussion. I look forward to your comments. Thank you.
Terrific, Anna. Thank you so much for your perspective and certainly for adding some richness and depth to the examples that Lida Vai has provided, and really thinking through the importance of having that multi-stakeholder approach and having any number of stakeholders at the table to continue that conversation and to really think through the importance of monitoring and evaluation as well. Thank you, Lida Vai. Thank you, Paula, for your presentations. There was a number of comments and a couple of questions as well, too, and just relaying a couple of those that, Paula, in terms of some of the topics of your presentation as well, that looking at some of the unintended impacts of patient engagement and how very inspiring and encouraging that really is for patient engagement as well, too, when we look broader and look at a broader scope in terms of some of the impacts. And Lida Vai, certainly thank you for sharing with us as well too, some more details around the paradigm monitoring and evaluation framework for those in the audience that may not be as familiar with the framework as well too. Really interesting to see in terms of the application of it, and some questions that have come up in the Q&A as well too. A couple that I think we'll address as we move through our next co-creation session. But one question perhaps for you to Lida Vai as we just transition to that, in terms of the development of the framework and looking at it initially perhaps through an industry lens, and then thinking through, from your perspective and from what you have seen, are you aware of a number of companies that have implemented it and sort of the feedback that you may have received to date? And then related to that, sort of a second part of the question would be thinking through beyond industry. How would you advise in terms of looking at the framework, to Anna's point, considering patient organizations or other stakeholders that obviously could be using the tool as well too?
Yeah, thank you. Very good questions, both. So to address the first question first, in the Paradigm Project, we worked with about 30 companies and patient organizations who then tested and applied the framework, and we co-created then the framework together. And after Paradigm ended and the publication came out, we have seen a number of requests of people who want to use the framework, a number of views of the videos and downloads, but I don't have the exact numbers on how many people are now using it. The poll indicated that in this session, some are very familiar with the framework, but for others, it's completely new. So I cannot give you the exact numbers, but we see a growing interest. And that's also why we hope to provide information via this session. In terms of different users, like patient organizations, but also regulators and others, we made the framework quite generic in a way that it can be used in different settings. And that's also why we provided a menu rather than a fixed set that enables different users to tailor it to their needs. So patient organizations, but also regulators. We worked, for example, with the EMA also in the Paradigm Project. We looked at their initiatives, and we also integrated metrics important from a regulator perspective. So I think it can be used in different settings and by different users, and also in collaborations, if that answers the question.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lida Vai. I appreciate that. As I mentioned, there's a couple other questions in our Q&A that as I scan through them, they're very applicable to some of the questions that we'll be posing to the audience as well too. So in the interest of time, I think what we'll do now is to move to this sort of insight gathering and the co-creation session so that we can have the input from the attendees. And certainly as we work through some of these questions, then we'll look to address some of the questions that are in the Q&A as well too. So this is at your time now in terms of you as participants and attendees to provide your input and share your insights. So if we can go to the first question, please. Next slide, thank you. And so we'll have a series of questions. There's 4 in total. Same format as we did before. The question will be outlined on the slide, and then we'll move to Slido where you can provide your input. So again, if you have lost the connection there with Slido, for instance, I'll ask that if we could also place that back in the chat in case anybody needs to reconnect. But the first question, why does your organization or an organization that you collaborate with want to monitor and evaluate patient engagement? This really relates back to what Paula was sharing with us in terms of the 5 A's and looking at in order to be accountable, to advocate, for analysis, for allocation, or for adjustment. And so as we move to the next slide, please, perhaps Paula, just as people are thinking through some of these responses, you wouldn't mind providing a little bit more in-depth discussion around, a little bit more detail around each of these responses as well.
Yes, so as I mentioned before, so the accountability is to your funder, to your patient population, to the people you're advocating for, and as I say, you'll find there's a sort of a continuum. It's not an either-or response to this, and it will shift over time, which is why it's always important to review all of these frameworks as you go along. Yeah, so somebody just put in that, yeah, it's a mix of these, absolutely. Again, it's depending on who you need to convince. Do you need to convince the people, which stakeholders you're convincing as to which case you'll need to make here? So, it's quite, see how many people have.
And it seems there's a strong response there in terms of advocating. And I would be interested in your perspective, Paula, and this is related to one of the questions that rose as well too, in terms of just looking at different stakeholders and thinking through what their needs are in terms of evaluation and the potential for the divergence amongst stakeholders. So potentially, as we look at the attendees in this session, where we did have a strong representation from patient organizations and patients themselves, making the case for advocating. Can you talk a little bit about in terms of how these responses may adjust to the different stakeholder types and in terms of needs?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the advocating one is quite an interesting one because, as I explained, I feel we've moved away from the needing to prove the need for resourcing. We've got that very well established, but it'll be interesting to see from which perspective they feel that that's still a priority area to show the impact, that people are still having to justify the resource and the time that's needed to do patient engagement and to truly embed it. So say you unpack from the different stakeholders. Adjustment, absolutely, it is about how we improve what we're doing. And I think from all perspectives, that should be a driving force, perhaps more so from the public and the practitioners, the people that support patient engagement activities, and also for the patient organisations to justify, to their own communities that they are a good conduit. They have a really important role in brokering the relationship between industry and the patient community. So everyone has different reasons for needing to evidence this, and for some it will be a small degree of each of them, but you prioritize your efforts where you need to evidence it most.
Thanks, Paula. I'm just seeing some comments in the chat as well too, that absolutely, well, there's some categories that we've listed here that perhaps in the other, there may be opportunities to address some of the unmet needs in different treatments and different developments as well too. So certainly an opportunity there, but very interesting to see, obviously, that in terms of advocating, that seems to be the strong response from this session anyways, but recognizing absolutely that there's any number of reasons why people would be, or organizations would be involved with patient engagement and monitoring and evaluating it. So a good overview for us. I think, Lidevai, I'd be interested to see from your perspective as well. Does this align with what you had anticipated as the development of the paradigm framework too?
Yes, definitely. The idea of the paradigm project was indeed to develop something that can be used to show return on engagement. So that really well aligns with also the advocate for making kind of a case for patient engagement. That was definitely one of the main drivers in the paradigm project.
Great, thank you. Let's move on to our second question. So, well, we appreciate that. Obviously, we'd love to be doing the monitoring and evaluation at all stages of patient engagement, at every point along the way. That may not be feasible, that may not be realistic for a lot of organizations. So here we've asked, under what 3 scenarios are you most likely to use patient engagement monitoring and evaluation tools? And if we move to the next slide, please, then people can start to enter. So we're looking at 3 different scenarios in terms of what are going to be most relevant for your organization. And as you're working through those, I can provide a little bit more description as well too. So would it be during individual initiatives where it just involves one person? Are we looking at larger group initiatives that involves multiple patients, and that may be patients, family members, caregivers, care partners involved with focus groups, advisory boards, one-time events, or ongoing initiatives in terms of looking at doing some type of measurement and evaluation at regular scheduled intervals throughout the initiative? Or is it during an ongoing initiative and it's at every interaction of patient engagement? So I think as we go through here too, looking at from an industry perspective, perhaps the research stage as well in terms of where we can look at patient engagement, or particular time points in the project as well in terms of planning, implementing, and evaluating. And I just see from the comments below that there may be some difficulty for people to select 3 choices as opposed to just only one. So let's see if there's further comment or might be able to support that. Oh, okay. Now we've got a couple of comments that it is working, that everybody is able to select 3. There may be a little bit of confusion there. So let's just focus on perhaps the one that's most important, or the most likely, sorry, in terms of using the monitoring and evaluation tool. So certainly in terms of larger group initiatives, that seems to be an ongoing. And I think, Anna, I'd be interested in your responses to this as well too, you know, from a patient organization perspective. How does that resonate, you know, for patients and for those being involved with patient engagement in terms of having the evaluation done at some of those larger group or ongoing initiatives?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think if we ask me, I would have said any time, any initiatives, we should evaluate, we should monitor and evaluate all of them. But as of course we need to choose one, I would agree, particularly in the kind of ongoing initiatives at regular scheduled intervals, as that means perhaps that patient public involvement activities where we have a stronger relationship, where we are working for a long period of time. And I think that'd be very useful for that, to have this monitoring and evaluating to see how in the short and also in the long term, we are, as I was saying before, making the difference, making sure things are happening, and we are just not there to tick a box or to be just purely for the just because it's nice to have patients, but we are making a difference. So for me, it makes a lot of sense that these 2 that have been chosen are perhaps the more relevant ones, because of course are where you have more resources invested, where you have more time invested. So for me, it would be the second one, the ongoing initiatives at regular scheduled intervals. But as I say, ideally, every single time, every single initiative should be in that part.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, as we had mentioned before, ideally, yes, we'd like to be doing it at all points, but realistically, that may not be an option, but interesting to hear from your perspective as well, too. Lidev, I have a question for you as it relates to, perhaps you can just think through this a little bit. As we're thinking about planning for patient engagement, the monitoring and evaluation, and how we plan that in, I understand that the PFMD quality guidance and the Transcelerate toolkit and the UPATI guidance were all integrated into the development of the framework. And I'm interested to hear your perspective in terms of, when we're thinking through planning, how do you suggest, or what is your advice in terms of integrating monitoring and evaluation tools into a patient engagement planning tool as well?
Yeah, thank you. Good question. I think that can be helpful, because when you early on when in planning stage think about monitoring and evaluation, it allows you to create that shared purpose, but also to track progress over time. And that perhaps also relates to one of Nicolas Brooks' comments in the quiz Q&A, but was still open, like, how can you monitor progress? And I think if you incorporate that in a planning tool, it allows you to track progress over time. Whether you can benchmark that is a slightly difficult question. I'm curious what others think about that as well. But in the Paradigm project, we have seen that people have used it when planning and implementing and evaluating patient engagement to compare at least when they started and where they are now, for example, in terms of level of trust. But also we have seen that they sometimes compared with what they expected in terms of outcomes in a clinical trial. And we have seen that some patient organizations also compared between collaborations or different methods of engagement to also prioritize their resources and efforts, but also to provide feedback to companies. And so they kind of looked at what can companies learn from each other. And then companies who are, who got really high satisfaction level, for example, they compared that with companies and collaborations that had lower satisfaction level, and they kind of shared some learnings in an anonymous way, but it's more like feedback than I would really call it benchmarking. But I'm curious what others think about that. But yeah, that's my take on it.
Interesting. I think you're absolutely right in terms of obviously trying to integrate that in terms of planning and preparation, and as you're looking along that continuum as well too. I think as Anna had alluded to before, that obviously for this question that the larger group initiative seems to be the area of focus in terms of looking at doing some type of evaluation, and then followed closely behind in terms of various research stages. And I imagine that might reflect in terms of the industry representatives that we have with us as well today too. So let's move on to question 3. So which are the 3 components of the paradigm monitoring and evaluation framework that are most helpful for you? And again, we're asking you to select the 3 most relevant for your organization. I think what we need to keep in mind here, and Lidevai can help to add some context to this as well too, is that as the framework was developed, the idea, and again, ideal situation would be to really think through how each of these components could complement and could contribute towards a framework and a tool. But again, thinking through, again, from various stakeholders' perspectives, it may not always be either reasonable or realistic for organizations to think through exactly how they can look at each one of these components. So Lidevai, I'm wondering if you can just take a moment too to help people reflect a little bit, maybe add some context around what each of these components really are reflecting, and from the framework's perspective.
Yeah, I see responses coming in. Yeah, so from a framework perspective, I think there are different points in time where you can measure different things. And also what Paula said, mostly we see that people track activities or process. So things that are easy to measure, so to quantify, like how many activities did we do, often also satisfaction levels, which can be very insightful. And often also input. So most people then measure then the time they've put in or the resources. So again, all kind of easy to quantify things. What we see now more and more that people start to measure learnings and changes, which I think can be very helpful to identify areas for improvement, but also to get that short-term results. So the direct results of patient engagement that you can measure, and that can give an idea for impact, which is often takes a while before it becomes visible. So yeah, for me, it will be very difficult to select most the relevant ones, but I understand that most people, I think it's 84% now, or yeah, can I see that correct? Yeah, so they all say that impact is of course most important. And I think that's why what brought us here, because it's so difficult to measure and it's not done enough yet. So there's still some work to do here, and I hope that the tool provides at least something that you can start with to really start measuring your road to impact, and ideally also show those long-term impacts over time.
Great, thanks, Lidevai. And Anna, from your perspective too, is this aligning in terms of from the patient organization perspective, and from if you were to go through this and identify from your side, what are the components that would be most useful from a patient organization perspective?
Yeah, I think as Lidevai was saying, indeed the impacts could be the kind of obvious choice. I have to say, personally myself, and that might not represent at all other patient organization perspective, but from my perspective, I think the less popular the context, I really like that one. I think it's a very important one sometimes to have this context, because it also helps us to progress and make changes and improve. Sometimes we need to understand the context in order to make better public involvement activities, and only by addressing the context we can then change and involve patients in a more meaningful way, being able to have better representation by diversity. So I think, although I understand it's not the most popular and perhaps not the more on the top of the list of people, I found that particularly interesting. And I was very, very glad when we decided to have that kind of context kind of surrounding the whole kind of accompanying kind of thing, the whole of the framework. I think it's something different, and I think it's really, really important. So not on the top of the priorities, but for me, a very important one. And I would kind of encourage people to also look at that one and consider the benefits of looking at the context.
Absolutely, Anna. As you said, the context is so important as well too. And Paula, just interesting to hear your reflection on these results, obviously as it relates to impacts and the responses that we've received here.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's to see where people are coming from. So sort of academia's driving impact case studies, and so some of the system things that are driving these. Whereas some of them, so satisfaction interactions are more of the process side of things, which we sort of have to unpack all of these. But it is interesting that, yes, the contextual factors, the community and the decision making, whereas it's something we're trying to actively increase, is still, and it's possible that people have got so much to deal with that is still seen as a too difficult box, and so therefore we need to make sure we can support people by creating an infrastructure to support that, to underpin that community outreach work, and to give people more confidence in that area.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great segue into our final question in terms of looking at ways that we could improve the user experience of the paradigm monitoring and evaluation framework, and thinking through some opportunities here to provide support, to provide some additional guidances, whatever it may be, so that people are comfortable and wanting to use the framework as well, to taking that first step for those of you that have not had an opportunity to use the framework yet. So as we go through some of these responses here, the responses that were gathered were from any number of conversations and discussions that either from PFMD or through some of our panelist conversations, that they were various responses that came from many different types of stakeholders in terms of some ideas or thoughts around how could we improve the user experience. So for instance, looking at more detailed explanations of the components, the subcomponents, and the metrics that make up the framework, looking at the description of the framework in another format. So currently, as it stands right now, it's obviously available online in a written format in an Excel spreadsheet, but are there other ways that it could be demonstrated? Should we be looking at additional case studies to provide some depth and richness to allow some comparisons as well too? Should we be looking at more sets of metrics? There's already 4 that are currently provided on the site, but would it be helpful to look at different scenarios, to look at different sets of metrics as well too? Or even thinking through some type of interactive guidance, which clearly, as I can see the polls coming in now, that certainly seems to be a very strong recommendation there. And looking at some way to allow a little bit more customization and really inputting and having some recommendations in terms of the tool itself. The other point would be looking at guidance for other departments or functional areas. Often we're talking about this within the patient engagement functional area, but is it useful to have some opportunities to provide some additional information for our colleagues that are in different areas that will be doing patient engagement monitoring and evaluation as well? And finally, linking back to the integration with some type of patient engagement planning tool, looking at the quality guidances, for example, from PFMD, would it be useful to have that integrated as well? And again, seeing the poll and looking to see how that is coming through as well. There's a comment in the chat as well about the possibility of integrating the two of those. So having something that's interactive, but also as it relates to having a planning tool to have the combined of those as well. So we'll see as the responses come through. I'm just having a quick look at the questions, and there's a question, Lee Devi, that I'm just going to turn over to you. And the question says, does the framework give a measure of what good looks like for each of the metrics and understanding what the results mean? So in some ways, I believe that's probably related back to looking at some of the benchmarking, the question that you've responded to before. So if you'd like to address that one as well.
That's a very good question. And we have discussed that over and over in the Paradigm project. I know that Anna, you also asked that question often, and we found that difficult to really say a good or bad because the context is so different, and what is good and what is then bad. I don't say it's impossible, you know, if you agree on a set of metrics and we have a bit more case studies, then perhaps we could learn and see like what's going well and not, but more as a feedback mechanism, perhaps than really a benchmarking, because the context is so different. So I find it difficult to answer that question. Currently, we don't have something that says this is what's good or what's bad. So I encourage current users to just reflect together on the findings and to together discuss, what do you think of the results? Is this good or bad? And if you do it quantitative, we have seen a couple of patient organizations and companies who measure satisfaction, for example, with the activities. That's quite easy to quantify. And if you do that on a scale, obviously you can say like, okay, a lot of people were very satisfied and some people were less satisfied. So I think it's the trick to combine different methods, quantitative and qualitative, and then to discuss with your collaboration what you think of the results and how that should be used and communicated. But I welcome any thoughts on this, on the others. It's a difficult question to answer.
Thanks, Lee Devi. I think that's an excellent point in terms of really looking at talking with the colleagues and providing some input in that respect as well too. I think keeping an eye on the time here, that we have come to the end of our session, and really want to summarize in just a few words to thank everybody for their participation, obviously in terms of our panel, for sharing your thoughts and insights. Really appreciate that. I think it's really helped to have a very rich discussion, and you've really encouraged our audience to think more closely about the Paradigm framework. It is a tool that exists currently. It is there to be used. I think in terms of helping to move forward, in terms of making patient engagement stronger and more meaningful, there's a tool right there on your doorstep that it's open to be used, but obviously with the feedback that we've received today, that I think we'll obviously have some opportunities to provide some input in terms of moving forward, in terms of next steps, and obviously through the work with PFMD, collaborating with a number of other stakeholders to think through how we can move this and make the improvements in terms of the user experience, but also helping to operationalize the tool in a much more holistic way as well too. So it's useful for not only industry, but obviously for patient organizations and any other number of stakeholders as well too. So I thank you to our panelists, I thank you to our audience members. And if we can just quickly move to the next slide, just to let our audience members know that your feedback is really important to us. Following this, you will receive a survey that will open automatically in your browser. And so we encourage you just to take a few minutes to share your experience. As we mentioned before, the resources from the session will be available on the Global Patient Engagement Map and Network signups, and you will receive inbox notification when that's ready for you as well too. Next slide, please. And then finally, just as a reminder too, today was the first day of the Patient Engagement Open Forum. We have 2 more sessions tomorrow that we encourage you to, obviously, if you have not yet registered but hope to attend, then the first one looking at how to connect patients to digital health. and also the second one in terms of patient engagement and looking to design, generate, analyze, and decide on patient experience data. We hope you can join in for those. Thank you again to everybody for all of your input, and enjoy the rest of your day.